Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 4 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. The Karma Stories podcast is published to all major podcasting platforms, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. This episode is sponsored by my 3D printing website. Visit dangly3d.com where you can get your hands on your very own Carmen Chameleon 3D printed Karma Stories mascot. And yes, it comes complete with cookies. Again, that's dangly3d.com, link in description on both YouTube and on the podcast. Alright, on to today's stories, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from One Piper Piping. Sure, everyone can come in. Friend of mine, who we'll call Buddy, said I could share this. Background: Buddy worked for a company that got on the hybrid work from home train early. He got his job around 2012. These events take place around 2016. We live in New Jersey, and his office was in New York City. His contract said that he had to be in 1 day a week, same day each week, and up to 5 days a month, so 1 additional day on top of his weekly day. If work brought him in more than that, he got paid his hourly billable rate for his commute and any extra hours. His commute was 1.5 to 2 hours each way, so that could quickly add up to hundreds or thousands of hours. Other than a couple of full-time in-office folks, his coworkers had similar contracts and had to be in 1 to 8 times a month, and some lived as far away as Boston or DC. They worked in a well-paid niche consulting field, so I guess this was worth it to everyone. On to the story. Buddy's company had a client who was very old school, and their point of contact is a jerk. On a video call, the client notices that some staff do not appear to be in the office, before Blur was as common, and demands that all of the work done for their contract be done in an office. Rants about professionalism. Buddy's manager simply says, okay. Manager calls a meeting afterwards with Buddy's team. He knows they're upset, but asks them to prepare to come into the office daily for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Tells them to keep very careful track of receipts, costs, times, etc., and asks them to trust him. For the people who live further away, tells them he'll help set up accommodations for them and their families if necessary. Because the company treats people well, everyone goes along with it, with minor grumbling. About 5 weeks go by, everyone is coming in daily. Remember when I said that most people didn't come in? So yeah, not much space in the office. The company liked teleworking because it allowed them to have a New York City headquarters, but not much space. Everyone keeps careful track of commuting costs, etc., time, and is getting reimbursed for their travel and everything they are owed. This included some folks who had contracts that covered lodging if they had to come in more than a day or 2 in a row. Then, one day, the manager tells them they can go back to their regular schedule. Everyone notices jerk client is gone, but that the company is still their client. Later on, Buddy finds out what happens. As per the terms of the contract, the client had to pay for all of that overage. Frustrating for the employees, but Buddy said no one was too mad knowing that it was temporary. Buddy's manager also knew that the same jerk point of contact had been a jerk. He had apparently gotten tired of being asked to sign contract modifications. Buddy said usually these were set at modifications over $1,000 or something, but this guy had thought these sign-offs were below him, and so set that threshold much higher, something like $100,000. Due to the wording of the contract, this was $100,000 per change, not total. So in the 5 weeks that everyone was coming in full time, he had managed to cost his company a few $100,000. But since each individual employee was a single change, no one noticed until the next billing cycle. Jerk got called out by his own company and they tried to contest the payment. Turns out the contract was very clearly written and the client had to pay. On top of that, this is a pretty niche field, and so the client didn't really have many other options if they wanted to change consultants at that point. Jerk point of contact got fired, and, according to Buddy's manager, couldn't really find work in their smallish field. Buddy and his coworkers got a nice chunk of money. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called LordJiba7. It says, "This is how you show your employees that you care about them. Rather than accept the terms of a demanding client and shrug it off as a necessary cost of doing business, you ask your team for additional support in exchange for appropriate reimbursement for the hassle, while setting the client up to pay for their own arrogance in a way that will inevitably result in everything going back to normal for your team and showing the client why your team prefers to work this way." OP responded and said, "Yeah, Buddy is still at this company from what I know. He said that he could make more money elsewhere, but that this place has a good work-life balance and genuinely seems to care, at least a little, about their people. And they have pretty low turnover for his industry." So a whole team of people had to go into the office for 5 to 6 weeks, literally putting their lives on hold. What happened with their kids, their pets, and other non-work obligations during that time? We obviously didn't hear any of that fallout in the story, but I'm guessing a lot of these people who had to come in for work were a lot more put out than we're hearing. And that makes you wonder, was it worth all that extra money? Yeah, actually, it probably was. This story comes to us from Black Compy. Make sure to understand corporate policy. Some years ago, I was working for a large corporation. One of the responsibilities of the team I was on was to offer on-the-job training for employees and managers on a number of topics that are not important here. The point is, we took our job seriously and tried to do the best work we could. Among other things, that meant changing the training topics and content on a regular basis to make sure it was up to date with industry standards and what our colleagues actually needed to know. At some point, we were approached by corporate HR. Apparently, our trainings were bypassing most of the central controlling and approval processes, which was creating issues for them. I could understand that. However, these processes were awful, slow, unnecessary, bureaucratic, and HR showed no interest in improving them. There was no way we could follow them without sacrificing our quality standards. I could have outright refused to follow them and created a massive conflict, but there was a better way. We set up a workshop with HR to make sure we understood the processes we needed to follow in detail. Over several exhausting hours, we mapped out every single step that needed to be done by anyone along every step of the way. Flip charts with scribbles and diagrams quickly filled up every square foot of available wall. At the end of a long and exhausting afternoon for everyone involved, I pointed out that we now had a full picture of what needed to be done. Good work, everyone. But we still needed to align on the next steps. How would we get there? It was at this point that the HR manager in the room asked whether we could postpone that topic for the follow-up workshop, as everyone seemed to be tired. Of course, we agreed. Funnily enough, that follow-up workshop never happened. Whenever the topic came up, everyone was quick to state how busy they were at the moment, and could we delay for a few more weeks? A year or two later, our training program had to end for an entirely unrelated reason, so it didn't matter anymore. So if you ever need to refuse to do something in the corporate world, don't say you won't do it, accept it, and make sure it slows to an excruciating crawl. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Paul Cosmith. It says, "I have avoided a lot of work in my career by telling people I couldn't start until they did something I needed to get started. They never gave me what I needed to start, so I never started." A little bit of a trick from the management perspective is to set up a whiteboard and make sure that people know who is ultimately responsible for ensuring things are completed on schedule. You have all the team members' names on that whiteboard, exactly what tasks you need them to complete at the top, and then either red, yellow, or green next to their names, because those people are going to move mountains to turn their line green. If no one is responsible, or there is no schedule, or you aren't reporting on it, they won't do it because it's not worth doing. This story comes to us from Mr. Chameleon DEC. Okay, I'll do it your way. Back in the 2000s, I worked for a bank, and for 2 of those years, I was the head teller. As the head teller, I also had to keep up with the cash in the vault. Now, it is never a good look for a bank to run low on money, but it happens. With that being said, I would try to order so that I didn't have too much, but enough on hand to keep us from panicking. Now, on to the story. There was a system that would tell me at the end of the week how much money I should order and or ship out. I will be honest with you, I went with my gut on this because 1, I knew my house, and 2, I paid attention to what kind of week it was going to be, holiday weekends, heavy paydays, etc. So my boss came to me to tell me that I was ordering too much and ignoring what the system said. My response? You can also see that I'm using whatever I'm ordering. I'm not just hoarding. So I was told, just do what the system says. Okay, bet. I gave my team the heads up. The next few weeks are going to suck. They're telling me that I'm ordering too much, so I'm going to do exactly what they told me to do. You can direct all the BS to me. If people get mad, don't worry about it. I'll take the heat. So for 3 weeks, I did exactly as I was told. And what I thought was going to happen did. It got to the point where we're cashing large checks in 20s and barely able to do that. Apparently, the complaints started going uphill because the following conversation happened. We're getting complaints about the branch not having enough big bills. I figured that would happen. We want to know why. I'm doing exactly what I was told. Whatever the system is telling me to do, I'm doing. But y'all already knew that. This can't keep happening. It wasn't happening when I was ordering the way I needed to. So now you have a choice to make. Do what you need to do for now until we figure this out. Okay. I was pretty much left alone after that. As a side note, I actually reached out to that specific department to ask about a workaround so that I wouldn't have to keep having this conversation. The solution they gave was so simple, and I never had that issue again. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Stuzzy. It says, "Thanks for the story. I am curious about the specific solution the department gave you." OP responded and said, basically, if I needed way more than what was recommended, then I was told to enter the extra amount in a certain section when I placed the order. That way, I was still complying. The caveat to that was if I consistently did this and that extra wasn't being used, that was my butt. So I made sure to do this in a way that I knew I was going to go through that money. As some of you might know, way back in the day, I managed a payday loan location. And before you rip me a new one on that one in the comments, I only lasted a year there because I had to check my morals at the door every time I went to work. But that gave me experience in having to order in cash in very large amounts according to what the system told me I was going to need, which definitely didn't take into account anything that was happening in our specific town. There were a bunch of times that we ran out of large bills because you just had to jump through too many hoops in order to change what you were allowed to order in. What I'm getting at is whether it's a bank or in my case a payday loan place, people should be given a little bit more authority on what they can order in when they know what's going on with their particular store. Not somebody up in a head office going, no, you don't need that, not knowing at all what's going on. This story comes to us from Depleted User. I want it to look nice around here. I live in a very tenant-friendly area. We have rent control, and landlords are not allowed to do things like demand security deposits, enter the property without proper written notice, or include no pet clauses in leases, which renew automatically every month after a fixed term ends. For the last 11 years, my husband and I have had a great relationship with our landlord, Joe, fake name. We've been very lenient in regards to repairs, and Joe was very forgiving when my husband and I both lost our jobs at the same time in 2016 and fell a few months behind on rent. We are now ahead on rent, but Joe is still very behind in maintenance and repairs. We have a whole laundry list of issues my landlord is aware of but hasn't done anything about for years. But we didn't care because he left us alone and has been overall very kind to us. A few years ago, our landlord allowed us to start storing stuff in an old, run-down shed in behind our rented portion of the yard. We never stored anything valuable out there because it's falling apart and squirrels have been using it to store walnuts from the numerous walnut trees in our yard. We had an old barbecue, lawnmower, ladders, and outside toys for my kids in there, until recently. A few months ago, Joe shows up asking about the shed, wanting to know what we had stored out there. I told him just some old junk we'll probably throw out soon. He told us that the family next door has a mouse problem, we don't, and he wants us to clear out the shed to prevent issues, and because I want it to look nice around here. I said, okay, I'll talk to my husband and we'll get it cleared out whenever we get a chance. I have an infant at home, so I can't go out back and clean it out myself unless someone else is here to watch the baby. My husband had a scheduled surgery, so he wasn't able to do any heavy lifting until after he recovered. Admittedly, cleaning out the old shed was not a high priority. Then, Joe sent me a passive-aggressive text. I just wanted to remind you that tomorrow is garbage day. We know, garbage pickup has always been Monday. And we need to work together to keep the rental property nice for everyone to enjoy. I replied, asking him if he had plans to fix the shed, to remove his scrap pickup truck, or to remove his open compost piles and heaps of mixed concrete and scrap metal he has out by the shed he wants us to clean. I also explained that my husband just had surgery and that we weren't planning on cleaning the shed that day. Reddit, he did not like that. He showed up unannounced, walked inside, and proceeded to yell at us in front of our kids. He complained about his personal finances and the economy, inflation, property taxes, swore at us about our effing crap, told us we can't use the shed anymore, and threatened to evict us because clearly you don't like living here and I can get way more for this house than what you're paying now. We told him to leave and that we will not communicate with him anymore unless in writing. He said, fine, we'll do it all by the book from now on, and stormed out. The next day, he put an eviction notice in our mailbox complaining that we have excessive garbage and waste in outbuildings, that we refuse to discuss this issue and corrective action with the landlord, and even adding that he felt it was unreasonable given the fact that he didn't evict us for late rent back in 2016. The notice gives us 7 days to correct the issues, or else my landlord can file for an eviction hearing. The next day, while I cleaned out everything belonging to us, sans the walnuts and squirrel poop from the shed, my husband got busy contacting local bylaws and the Rental Housing Enforcement Agency, traffic cops for landlords. He was given information on how to file against the landlord for refusing to do repairs, illegal entry, loss of an amenity, the shed, and harassment. After a surprise inspection that happened last week, we were given a report that said Joe was given 90 days to fix the roof, plumbing, and weeping tile. He must demolish the shed and either erect a new shed or give us a rent reduction, because the shed was an assumed amenity. According to my neighbors with the mice issue, the provincial government is also involved now because apparently he filled in a pond without a permit. And now the fire department doesn't have a nearby water source in case of fire. No hydrants out here. The city, by law enforcement, threatened to fine him for every day that he leaves his large pile of broken concrete and rebar out back. The cherry on top happened yesterday. He sent me a text to tell me that him and the plumber were going to be there within the hour. Normally, I'd be okay with short notice, despite the law saying he must provide 24 hours written notice. Not this time. I told him we need 24 hours notice. He showed up, knocked on the door, and when I reminded him that I won't speak to him in person anymore, he called the police saying that I was being hostile towards him, and he doesn't feel safe coming here. He sat outside for 4 hours waiting for the police, who later called me instead of showing up. The officer who called said that Joe was told to stop harassing us and that he needs to provide 24 hours notice to enter the home. He wanted to make sure Joe left and gave proper notice, and asked me if I wanted an officer there tomorrow to keep the peace. If Joe doesn't do the repairs he's supposed to do, we plan on taking him to court and filing for a rent reduction, and for a lien to be put on the property so he can't just sell it. We're just doing it by the book from now on, and just want it to look nice. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Fancy Conversation 42. It says, "Lovely bit of revenge here. It is in everyone's interest to know their rights when they are renting. There are so many things that can be done about terrible landlords." OP responded to this one and said, "A lot of landlords will try and take advantage of tenants that don't know their rights. My husband and I believe that Joe assumed we didn't know what our rights were, because we haven't exercised them in the last 11 years, as a courtesy. We also think Joe wanted the shed cleared out because it's cheaper to blame us and the mess in the shed for the rodent issue next door than it is to hire an exterminator." A commenter called IRman responded to this and said, "It sounds like poor Joe didn't read the book he was planning to go by." OP responded to this one and said, "Yeah, I don't know what he thinks he's doing. He called the cops saying he didn't feel safe being here, but then proceeded to hang out here for 4 hours waiting for a cop to come by, and, I don't know, force me to talk to him?" This one was quite interesting to me because it's plainly obvious that OP is from the same province in the same country as I am. Here, tenants are really well taken care of, and there's a lot of things you can do to get back at a landlord that's being a dink. On the flip side, however, tenants are able to stay in places without paying for a very long time because of the process that the landlord has to go through in order to get them out. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Back to the story though, I think it's funny how the landlord is harping on OP because of the stuff they have in the shed, supposedly causing the mouse problem, when the landlord themselves has open compost piles out back. Gee, I wonder why the mice are there. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to the favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.